Hi, everyone. Welcome to One Nation Under God. I'm Susie Pinto. Thanks for joining us here on NewsNation. Today, my guest is Rebecca Supriya Shah. She is principal investigator at the Religion and Economic Empowerment Project at the University of Dallas. She's also special advisor to the president for global initiatives at the University of Dallas, and she is based in Bangalore, India. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Susie. It's a pleasure to be here.
So today we're talking about Zohran Mamdani, the newly elected mayor of New York.
Hmm.
He is the first Muslim to be elected as mayor of New York, and his faith has always been an integral part of his identity. Is That's what he said, and throughout his campaign, and even days before he was elected, he delivered a message to Muslim New Yorkers, and he vowed that he would not hide in the shadows as a Muslim, and he decried what he called mistreatment in the wake of 9/11 for Muslim New Yorkers. And it was a very bold and passionate promise that he was not going to shy away from his Muslim faith or his Muslim identity. So today we're going to talk about this historic win and his faith as a Muslim. And Becky, I thought maybe where we could start is where his background, where he came from. He Mamdani was raised in Kampala, Uganda, and spent the first 7 years of his life there as part of in the Indian diaspora. Um, Many Indians went to the British colonies, as when they were still colonies, and there was this diaspora. So let's start there. How do you think that that experience impacted Mamdani and his identity?
Well, that's a great question. Before that, however, Susie, because you talked about a little bit about Zohran's, uh, and because I'm going to be talking about his father and referring to his father as Professor Mamdani, might I take the liberty of just calling him Zohran or Zohran Mamdani sometimes, so we distinguish between the two individuals? Because you talked about the speech he gave days before the election referencing 9/11, I thought I'd say first, congratulations to Zohran. I mean, it's a pretty amazing. He won in the most iconic U.S. city, the wealthiest city, I should say, and he is, of course, as you said, the first Muslim mayor. Next year, America will mourn and commemorate 25 years since 9/11. And as someone who stood on the top floor of the World Bank building and watched plumes of smoke rise up from the Pentagon, uh, I am forever shaken by that day. But here we are, 24 years later, in New York City, electing a Muslim mayor. So America is truly a land of opportunity. It is an amazing place that those the very same people who he said mistreated Muslims in New York immediately after 9/11 now elect him. So it's a remarkable journey. And of course, Zohran became an American citizen only 7 years ago. So he got his citizenship 7 years ago. Up until then, he was a Ugandan citizen, presumably a green card holder or whatever. So he 7 years ago. So that's just I wanted to preface that as someone who herself experienced 9/11 and you know uh, and what all that went with it. And here we have a Muslim mayor, um, and now in America's most iconic city. Regarding his background, Zohran's father, Professor Mamdani, as I will refer to him from now on, uh, comes from a from a from a group of um, Asians that for many years have migrated from the east of India to the east of Africa. For centuries, Indians, uh, East Indians migrated for different reasons. In the in the late 1800s, it was for trade. So the Indian Muslims from Gujarat moved for trade, and I think Zohran, Professor Mamdani's family, the father's family, went in the mother, that is the grandmother of Zohran, that family went in the 1890s. So they moved that many years ago. And I think Professor Mamdani, the father of Zohran, his grandfather, uh, moved in, say, the mid 20th century. So they've been established in East Africa for quite a while. And that community is a very established community. And then the British in around the early 20th century took a whole lot of Asians from, because the British were ruling Indians, sorry, and placed them in India, in East Africa for the railways. So there's
To
always been
build the
this
railway.
to build the railway. So there's always been this movement, one for trade, one for as sort of bonded laborers. And so there's always been this movement from the east of India, from which Mamdani Sr. hails, to East Africa. And there's a large diaspora there. Um, the Indians in East Africa served as traders. There was not much colonial investment, so Indians gave a lot of money. Mombasa, there was this great economic history on how much money the Indians provided to invest in infrastructure, because there wasn't any colonial investment. So they played a significant role. In terms of Uganda and Tanzania, Indians served both as investors, as traders, but also as the bureaucrats for the British. And this didn't go down well. And they were also traders, and like most experiences of the Indian diaspora, they kept to themselves. There was a sort of they didn't really, at least scholarship and also sentiment at the time said they didn't really invest in sort of civic. Went very involved in the community. They kept to themselves. They were traders. They were bureaucrats. They married among themselves. Another thing is there was also at the time. I'm talking now about uh, the post the 60s and now the 70s, then in early 1970s, when we have the 60s and 70s, we have these once colonized East African nations becoming independent. And this is Kenya and Uganda. The Mamdani family, of course, when Professor Mamdani, Mahmoud Mamdani, was 5, they moved from Tanzania to Uganda, and he's now in Uganda as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, and he's growing up there. And he's I don't know how much you want to get into this, but he studies in America, and he comes back, and in the early 1970s. And in 1972, we have uh, this the military dictator Idi Amin. Uganda becomes independent in 1962, and 10 years later, in August 1972, Idi Amin declares, he wants all Asians out. He expels theirs. There's a mass expulsion of Asians, Asian shopkeepers, even Asian traders, Asian bureaucrats. They're all kicked out, and some of them go to back to India. Some of them, very few, I think, stay, but most of them go to England. And a lot of the diaspora, Asian diaspora in Great Britain, you will see, hail from East Africa.
And was that about 100,000
A lot, yes, quite a
or
few,
so? Yeah.
50,000, 100,000, yes. And
Okay.
they go to now. I'm not entirely sure what happens to Mahmoud Mamdani's, the Professor Mamdani's family, but this period. the Professor Mamdani benefits, one, I have to say this, in 1963 as a gift to Uganda. As a gift to Uganda, the Kennedy government brings 23 students over to the United States. And Mamdani, the father, is one of those. And he studies in the University of Pittsburgh. He gets his engineering degree. He then goes to Tufts. He registers at Harvard. That he comes back in 1972 to do field work and then almost immediately gets kicked out.
Okay.
In interviews with him, and I've read and I've heard that he doesn't really regard himself as didn't really see himself as a Muslim. He called himself an agnostic. So in terms of the father's faith commitment, I'm not really sure about that. So if you're asking me, was Zohran Mamdani shaped by his father's faith, I couldn't tell you because there's not much about that. He called himself a radical Pan-Africanist. He wrote about his writings are Marxist based, and so I don't know how much of the Muslim faith, Islam, shaped the father's life
We
and therefore shapes the son's life.
we just
I'm not.
don't know. There's no,
We
yeah, we
just
just
don't.
don't
There's
know.
no evidence from what I've read and see. The father called himself an agnostic. Perhaps later in life he becomes more devout. I don't know. The mother, Mira Nair, as most people will know, is a famous filmmaker. She grew up in India. She is Hindu, comes from a Hindu background, a very, very comfortable middle class Hindu background. She was raised in Rourkela in Orissa, and her father, Zohran's sort of maternal grandfather, was an Indian civil servant. My mother was a very middle class woman. They, from all what I see, and I've watched videos of her because she's the grandmother, was part of the foundation that Mira Nair formed after her first movie, Salam Bombay. She's a very upper class, middle class, well spoken, urbane Indians.
Yeah, well
Um,
educated.
well educated Indians. So these are people that are very comfortable, both on the father's side and the mother's side. They are comfortable people. How much faith has shaped the mother's life, I don't know. I'm not sure. He talks about it. But, you know, let just talking a little bit about the Mamdani family, the father's family. They come from the Khoja community, the Khoja Muslim community. And the Khoja Muslim community, the British called the Hindu Muslimans. Why was that? Because they had a very comfortable relationship with Hinduism. It was a sort of a fluid relationship. And so they, of course, have later become more rigorous in their Islamic adherence to Islamic tradition and teachings. But in those days, they were. So the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, was a Khoja.
Oh,
I think
wow.
yeah, and there's a interreligious person who does a lot of interreligious work in America, Ibu Patel. I think he's also from the Khoja community. Now the Mamdani, Mahmud Mamdani and Zohran Mamdani are Twelvers Shiites. They are Shiites. I don't know if
Wait,
you want
just
me to.
before we go to that, let's just talk a little bit about the interfaith marriage and how
Yeah,
significant it is for a Muslim to marry a Hindu. At least it has been in the past. Can you tell us why that would be
yeah.
controversial or?
Well, here again, I'm glad I gave you the background about Khoja Muslims because the Khoja community, and were, as I said, called Hindu Muslims. So they had a very relaxed relationship with other faiths, at least traditionally. And like I said, I don't know much about Mehmood Mandani himself and how rigorous or how traditional he was as a Muslim, or Mira Nair, how firm or uh, uh, she was in her committed she was to her Hindu beliefs. But in terms of an interreligious marriage in India, if you think about Indians and in India, or even those for whom Islamic religious teachings and values and Hindu teachings and values are deeply held, it would be very difficult. It would be very difficult. I'm talking about today or even in the past, interreligious marriages were not common.
And
There
even
was
even abroad, even in the
Oh,
diaspora.
absolutely. They were
Okay.
not common. They were not common. So the fact that the marriage happened, I'm again, this is again conjecture on my part. The fact that the marriage happened, one goes speaks to the Khoja community's own and the Mamdani families and the Khoja understanding of just the other interreligious openness, but also to and I don't want to step out of line and speak to the whether or not the these people had deeply held religious beliefs, but it also speaks in some respects, yes, to um, to these two individuals and what they saw as important in their life. So very traditional Hindus, very traditional Muslims do not usually marry.
Mary, right.
Does it happen? I'm sure. Is it common? Certainly not.
Certainly not.
Certainly not
Okay.
in the
So, but and what about at that? Because you mentioned that they were very comfortable, middle class, middle to upper class. What about at that level of society, sort of, more elite members of their communities? Would it be? It's maybe they're a little bit more cosmopolitan. I'm just,
Mm.
again,
Yeah, yeah,
speculating.
yeah. I think that's a very good question. And um, so Mira Nair, many people talk about her being Indian, and she certainly is Indian. But in the fact that she was born in India and she has Indian parents, but she represents a very, very minuscule group, a small minority of Western educated English speaking secular Indians. Now, uh, is the diaspora, are Indian Americans increasingly like this? Possibly, yes. You see that. Is To what extent is does she represent the majority of Indians? She does not. So yes, I think the fact that she was this Harvard educated, she went to Harvard as an undergraduate. We didn't talk about that. She studied visual arts, I think, at Harvard, having gone to Delhi University before that. She goes on a full scholarship to Harvard, I think, at around 19 or 20. She's in America. She's already grown up in this very middle class, upper middle class, English speaking, presumably, background, and now goes abroad. So, yes, there is this minuscule the group, the small minority of Indians that exist. But and I mean, I don't. It's probably a very strong term, uh, but a lot of Indians today, a lot of Indians like Mira Nair today, are what I would call a kind of deracinated group of individuals who are in many ways untethered from their own religious traditions, values, beliefs, and their heritage. Now, do they celebrate Diwali? Absolutely. I mean, California has just made it a state holiday, right? This year. So, yes, I mean, are they Indian insofar as they enjoy Bhangra and have these huge weddings? And Indians are the most likely, I think, after Koreans, are the most likely ethnic group to marry within the community.
Oh,
So, yeah, I married an Indian. So, so we marry within the community. We are very close knit, but this particular group of people, of which Mira Nair, I think, represents, is detached from Indian culture, and in some ways, her movies reflect that. We can talk about that later, but in some ways, her movies reflect that. I read an article in the Guardian which quoted Zohran Mamdani's campaign manager, and he talked about the fact that he said, Zohran's Mamdani was shaped by his mom's movies, shaped deeply by his mom's movies, and Mississippi Masala, the namesake, and it's about the diaspora and exile, their wrestling with globalism, their struggle with patriarchy, and all these issues. I mean, in the movie The Namesake, which is based on Jhumpa Lahiri, another Indian American from the diaspora, Bengali in this case. The namesake, where Gogol, the protagonist, is deeply, mentally
Troubled. Yeah.
troubled, and he jumps in and out of bed. He takes up with his girlfriend in his girlfriend. He lives, cohabits with his girlfriend in her parents' apartment. This is just unheard of in India. Unheard of. I mean, I think to some extent it's possibly even unheard of at the time in America. But so these are the I'm not going to go so far as to say values, but these are the themes, the issues that I think might have shaped his thinking. Patriarchy, you know, India, the Indian values are to the extent that he may have taken them from his mom's movies, are crushing. I'm not excusing it. We do have this patriarchal culture to a great extent, and women are not treated as well as they ought to be. But some of the issues and values and some of the themes that his mom's movies focus on might have shaped him possibly more than, I think, truly traditional Indian values, which we can talk about later.
So, this is very interesting. So basically, despite the fact that his mother, Mira Nair, was a Hindu, he was raised as a Muslim.
Yeah,
Presumably, his father's faith was perhaps, we don't know, but more important. So they decided to raise him as a Muslim. So,
a
um,
Shiite.
a Shiite, yes. Okay, so explain to our audience the difference between Sunni and Shiite and what that means, just generally.
Oh, well, very generally, I mean, after the Prophet Muhammad dies in the 1630 AD, he doesn't leave a successor. And there are groups of people that believe, one group that believes the successor should come from his bloodline, the Prophet's bloodline. The other group believes that the successor should be a pious person. And the people that believe that that his successor, the Prophet's successor, should come from his bloodline are the Shiites. And within that, and the others are the Sunnis. Sunnah means the way. So the Shiites, of course, they believe there were different imams after the Prophet, and there are different numbers of imams. I don't want to get into the details, but the Zohran is a 12er schism. So what that really means is that these particular group of Shiites believe there are 12 imams. 11 have existed. The 12th is hidden. He is hidden. And he will emerge at the time of chaos to save the world. So he's a unique, he's even within the Shia group of Shias, he's a 12er. So it's Iran has there are a lot of 12ers in Iran. So he's a Shia.
He's a
And so
Shia.
like
Okay.
a 12er Shia. So there are Ishmailis and others, but he's a 12er. So even it's like within the Shias, there are these subcategories.
Okay. And as you said, well, certainly with his father but with Zoran, he has spoken about his faith a lot. Not in detail in terms of how it shapes his policy, but
Hmm.
he definitely made it a very clear issue during his campaign. And with that video in which he is addressing Muslim New Yorkers and very clearly saying that after 9/11, Muslim New Yorkers have had to live in the shadows. I mean, he basically says that in his video, and he is not going to do that, is what he said. He is
Mm.
not going to take his, he starts off the video saying that, an uncle, which in
Yeah,
broader Indian culture may mean a family friend, but a close,
yeah,
somebody who he considers an elder in the community, warns him that he doesn't have to talk about being Muslim because implying that will hurt him. And he says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be very clear about my Muslim identity. Which makes us realize that that is a very integral part of who he is and his background, and he's definitely not gonna shy away.
yeah. So, you know what? If that is really the case, as a devout Roman Catholic who believes in the sanctity of marriage in life and that marriage is between a man and a woman, I applaud it. But from what I have read and seen from some of his statements on marriage, on same-sex marriage, on transgenderism, and other aspects. I particularly don't know how he is going to live out as a as a faithful Muslim and hold these views. So in Islam, homosexuality is haram, it's forbidden. Abortion is permitted up until 120 days. And in some particular groups of Muslims, it's forbidden completely, but it's certainly prohibited. And in India, with the number of female gendercide, where we have missing girls because abortions of baby girls are high because of some preference. Muslims have a very, very, very good record on not aborting girls. So
Really?
it's
Wow.
yeah, it's one of the best. Muslims do not. So
So,
it's
just for our audience, for our audience to be clear, basically, girl babies are aborted at a much higher rate in India.
We have 17 million, maybe higher, missing girls since the 1970s and 80s when began to use ultrasound to determine sex. So, and even now, even though it's banned, we have very high rates of gendercide, what we call gendercide. But Muslims are remarkable insofar as they're less likely. They do it? Yes, but they're less likely than Hindus. Christians are pretty good to do not abort girls as higher rate as Hindus. But Muslims have a very good record. So Mamdani's policies on abortion, on homosexuality, and others are at odds with Muslim teaching, with Islamic teaching. So if he wants to be and wishes to be a good Muslim and a good Muslim mayor, I would hope that he would follow good Muslim teachings, because as a Roman Catholic, I would like very much, and as a Christian who believes in these things, I would like very much for that to be the case. But I don't see it. I don't see it, and well, maybe he'll change. I don't know.
Yeah, and he's not the first religious politician to depart from the values of their faith, right? I mean, of
Yeah,
sort of picking and choosing issues. But
yeah,
it's interesting. So Batya Ungar Sargon, who
yeah,
is a host here on NewsNation, her show Batya, which airs on Saturday afternoons, she made a very good point, and she said that he's not an Islamist, but he's, in her words, a nepo baby, right? Just someone of his generation in a certain milieu who basically they're, that generation that they, um, he's very much one of his, Gen Zer who has certain beliefs and sort of has formed their own ideology based on sort of picking and choosing causes. Of course, he's, pro-Palestinian and has been very critical of the state of Israel, which is
yeah,
another interesting part of his win, is that, Jewish New Yorkers did depart for Cuomo, but
yeah,
he still did get a sizable chunk of the Jewish vote, and certainly his peers, his age group, Jewish New Yorkers of his age group were, he had many supporters, and so that's very interesting in the city.
absolutely.
A city in, with the highest Jewish population in the United States, they having a Muslim mayor, that's a very interesting
It's the,
juxtaposition.
it is. And you talked about him picking and choosing. Yeah, he does. I think the short answer is yes. I think he picks and makes up, and does he make up his own ideology? I think the short answer to me, I would say, is yes. I mean, the whole idea of private property, I think he's talked at some point about it. But in Islam, there there's limited private poverty, but it's what is the state of that limit? There are some schools which would say there needs to be measures to for sort of radical equalization, redistribution. There are some schools, but there are other schools in Islam which talk about private property and say if wealth is accumulated in a just and honest way, and if wealth is if the individual or group of individuals are able to, and are willing to provide zakt, which is, like a tithe, a religiously required tithe, and the requisite amount of zakat, then it's permitted. Private property is permitted. So I do not know, but I do not think so. Think that Mayor-elect Mamdani has thought deeply about these issues, or even has gone into it from a Muslim point of view. So using his faith as a basis. I don't know. I don't think he has, because he would have to really examine it. And has he really picked and choose some policies? If you think about about even the social issues, I do think, in terms of, has faith guided it? I mean, I don't know, but because if faith has guided it, some of the policies he would be advocating would be very different, would
Yeah.
be extremely different. I think it speaks to the particular youth, the group of people that he's hoping to was hoping to have vote for him, and they did vote for him. Young people, disproportionately voted for him. So clearly, his message worked, uh,
Resonated. Yeah. So
resonated.
So you bring up a very interesting point, which is, how the intersection of Islam and politics and,
Yeah,
political Islam. So, at least as an overview, you pointed out that there are various schools of thought within Islam, but generally, many times, at least in certain cultures, when like politics and Islam are very fused.
yeah. Well, I'm first. I want to say, Susanna, that I am not an expert in politics or in Islam. So I am, way out of my lane when I start on this topic. So, all the experts on politics and Islam will have to forgive me. So I'm not an expert. However, as I want to say that, yes, political Islam is when, some Islamists would believe that state policies ought to be shaped by Islamic teachings. And an example of that would be the Jamaati Islami in Pakistan, or the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And these are very, strong Islamists. Zohran Mamdani is not an Islamist. And I'm going to get into trouble for saying this, but he's as much an Islamist as perhaps John F. Kennedy was a Catholic, in the sense that deeply committed to deeply held beliefs. So, in terms of worrying about the extent to which Islamist um, Islamic values, or way Islamic teaching will begin to start shaping state policy, I'm not too worried about that. But we have to see. We have to see how people always, how this will pan out. And is he anything like Jamaati Islami or the Muslim Brotherhood? I don't think so. So
Yeah.
I'm not worried about that at all. So no.
What about the reaction in India to his election?
Oh yeah, that's been interesting. That's been interesting. I mean, you are an Indian American, so this is no surprise to you. But when Indians succeed anywhere, in the Indian nation rejoices. Take the spelling bee, for example. They don't know anything about the spelling bee. Heck, they can't even spell a lot of the time. You just drive around India and you see this bad spelling on the shops. So, but local newspapers will have so and so, Susanna Pinto wins spelling bee. So Indians rejoice in other Indians' successes. It's a kind of a shared success,
Pride, yeah.
pride, But, and I think they're all caught up in the moment. But when they, for the most part, the progressive values and particular points of view about marriage and sexuality that are espoused by the Mamdani camp are at odds with the majority of India. The majority of India. In October,
Regardless of religion. I mean, India, we
regardless
should
of religion,
remind people, is a
absolutely,
multi-religious
it's
society.
a multi-religious society. Hindus, Muslims, Christians, which include Protestants, Baptists, Catholics, Jains, Parsis. across India. It's just this diverse, wonderful country with so much diversity, not just religious, but regional diversity. And despite the vast diversity of India's religion, we are still very, very, very traditional in our views on, let's say, marriage. In October 2023, the Indian government ruled against same-sex marriage. And this was a big case because the rest of South and Southeast Asia were watching how India would rule, and it was a long, drawn out legal battle. And one of the strongest supporters of the government of the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party government, which is, for the most part, made up of a coalition of people, but of different religious traditions, but is dominated by Hindus. The strongest supporter of this government's stand against the legalization of same-sex marriage, was the Jamati Hind and the All India Board of Muslim Personal Law. And they spoke very strongly, saying that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that the government should stand firmly for marriage to be between a man and a woman. And so, yes, while Indians will stand on the streets now and celebrate Indian Muslims, Indians in general, young Indians in large cities like Mumbai and Bangalore and Chennai and elsewhere will celebrate Zohran Mamdani's win. I think for the most part, most Indians will be are at odds with his views and his promotion of these particular same-sex marriage and particular points of view, which which for the most part are not held here. So yes, Indians celebrate other Indians, spelling bee or the win of a mayor or the second lady of the United States. They're always celebrating other Indians. But I think when you get down to where they start examining what he really stands for, there'll be questions and it will fade. I hope so, at least.
Well, listen, this was a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much, Rebecca Supriya Shah, for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.